All right, let's go ahead and get started. So, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us to learn about communicating community risk and resilience. My name is Logan Sand, and I'm a Recovery and Resilience Planner here with the Colorado Department of Local Affairs. Today's webinar is the second in the 2018 Planning for Hazards webinar series. This webinar will be recorded and posted along with previous webinars at the planningforhazards.com website. Just a quick note, after today's presentation, you'll receive a follow-up email with the link to the webinar, the slides, as well as the AICP CM credit information, which you can also see towards the bottom of your screen on this first slide here. Right. So today I'm joined by Nicole Amon. She is a senior community planner with the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Nicole manages the mitigation planning program, and I'm also joined by Ann Kuchenmeister, who is a community planner with Michael Baker International, and works with the Resilient Action Partners and focuses on supporting FEMA with community education and risk communication. So just a quick overview of what we'll be talking about today. We're really going to be talking at a high level on about how to cultivate a community willingness and a motivation to reduce risk and build resilience. In particular, we're really going to focus on the importance of reducing risk through hazard mitigation and land use planning. Nicole will dive into several key resources to support making the case for pre-disaster preparedness at the local level with decision makers. And Ann's going to talk about framework and strategies for public engagement and highlight a variety of new planning techniques and methods to use during and throughout the public engagement process. At the end of the presentation, we'll have a little bit of time for some question and answers. So if you have any throughout the course of this presentation, please type them down in the chat box and we'll try and get to them towards the end of the presentation. So just kicking things off, we talk about a resilient community. A resilient community really is a community that makes proactive policy and investment decisions, local policies that are designed and adopted to support and safeguard the community and assets are really critical to long-term viability. Also, a resilient community is very transparent about risk and vulnerability and understands the hazards that exist in addition to where they exist and who and what populations are at risk. A resilient community strengthens public and private partnerships, really builds synergies with local businesses to support land use and hazard mitigation plans and projects. Ann's going to highlight a couple examples of this later in our presentation. And then, of course, a resilient community has the ability to recover rapidly from any type of acute shock or long-term stress that the community might be facing. So just setting some additional context here for why we need to care about hazards. Well, the state has a bit of a growth challenge taking place. Currently, our population is at 5.6 million people, and we're expected to balloon out to about 8.6 by 2050. So with the addition of another 3 million in the state, we really need to ask some tough questions, think about long-term solutions for how we want to grow and shape our communities, and really be able to communicate that at the local level. Colorado is also a land of extremes. Natural hazards are increasing in frequency and severity. Every year we have floods, we have exceptional droughts, we have over 4,200 wildfires annually. We're second to Florida in the number of ground lightning strikes. And hazards are also very interconnected. So when we think about all these compounding issues, lightning does create fires, and flooding is correlated to drought issues as well. Colorado is also experiencing a change in climate conditions, and we need to really plan to see an across-the-board 2 to 6 degree increase in Fahrenheit by 2050. A lot of the places that we know of right now might look quite different in the future, and climate change really is a force multiplier with the ability to amplify the impacts that natural hazards have on our communities. When we think about natural hazards and their impacts, they also are exacerbated and intermingle with stresses that we might face at a local or regional level. We're thinking about aging infrastructure or high unemployment or issues with low vacancy in the housing market. Those underpinning stresses really have the ability to exacerbate a natural hazard event. And just in general, we always want to try and avoid having to deal with recovery. It's extremely traumatic for everyone that's involved, for the community. So that is a key communication point when you're trying to do some pre-disaster preparedness and mitigation. But before we're able to actually communicate what it is that we're at risk of, we need to understand our conditions and our risk. So there's some basic questions that we can ask as we approach and start having these key conversations with our appointed or elected officials, our stakeholders, and the public. What are the key hazards that are facing the community and the community assets, but also the vulnerable populations that are at stake, and really that range of impacts that can take place with any type of natural hazard event, and designating where those hazardous areas are and our ability to cope and the capabilities that we have to respond to those hazards. Really a great place to start with understanding your risk and vulnerability is with your local hazard mitigation plan, as well as your hazard identification and risk assessment. So I already went over a little bit about some of the implications for Colorado. We really need to be smart about our land use planning as we move forward in the future. There are a number of different approaches that local communities can consider when balancing some of the hazard issues that they might be facing. Sort of that best practice, the one that's most effective, is avoiding hazard-prone areas, but growth and development in hazard-prone areas. But that's not always politically feasible or palatable to the community. But we can also prevent development from hazardous areas, and this can be accomplished through regulatory and non-regulatory approaches, such as, as an example of a regulatory approach, something like an overlay zoning district, or non-regulatory incentive approaches, such as land acquisition. We can also direct future growth to safer areas through some of our long-range planning processes, like maybe our comprehensive plan, or even through other additional mechanisms. And then lastly, sort of protecting what existing development that we have. We can strengthen existing development through many different land use and mitigation strategies, whether it's upgrading development standards or requiring non-conforming properties to be brought into compliance with current standards, updating your building codes for safer development, et cetera. There's a number of different choices that we have, and I'll get to it in just a second, but the Planning for Hazards Land Use Solutions for Colorado Guide was published in early 2016, and this guide was really designed to help inform local government's long-term recovery efforts, but also to help communities be proactive in planning to reduce risk. For anyone who's not familiar with it, this guide really does focus on how to identify community risk to a number of Colorado-specific hazards, and to help select and implement the right land use solutions to make communities safer. So just a quick snapshot of what the content in the guide. There are 27 different land use strategies, and 14 of them have tailorable model code. Of the strategies that exist, most of them have engagement strategies that are required of them to be successful at the local level when you're talking about implementation. The guide also does have information on how to identify your hazard risk and assess them. But I'm not going to spend too much time here on this slide. Another quick snapshot: there are 6 categories of tools, or 6 categories, I should say, for each of the tools that the guide offers. Addressing hazards through plans and policies, through strengthening incentives, protecting sensitive areas, improving site development standards, building an infrastructure, as well as those administration or enhancing the administration and procedures. And again, like I said, this is just a snapshot for one particular tool under each of the classifications, and you can see all the different hazards that it addresses. So as you're considering, what it is that you're vulnerable to and what you want to mitigate against, and you might consider a strategy that actually has more than just one hazard that it addresses as you start, communicating with your elected officials and your local government. Planningforhazards.com is where you can find all this information. There's a lot of information, and the guide is downloadable there as well. We have additional webinars and videos, such as community engagement for hazards planning that Manitou Springs pulled together. It's really, really good. just a quick snapshot of some of the different mechanisms and processes and strategies that they use for their comprehensive planning process. For example, we also have, we were implementing the planning for hazards process with 2 pilot communities, and as a result of that, we've created some workbooks to follow along 6 work sessions that any community can essentially pick up to undergo the land use planning process and choose a land use strategy that has a risk reduction component to it, and actually walk through various timeframes of implementation of that particular tool. So I strongly suggest and highly recommend folks check it out if interested. So at this point, I'm actually going to turn it over to Nicole, who's going to talk about some of those really great resources that will help you engage with your appointed officials and elected officials in key constituencies of your government.
Great, thanks, Logan. Hi everyone. I'm Nicole Lemon, and as Logan said earlier, I manage the mitigation planning program here in Region 8, and I'm based out of Denver. And one thing that just always comes up is, the why behind investing in mitigation. And so really being able to talk about that financial return of investment is what I'm looking to do. And I'm going to go through 3 reports that really are able to tell that story and show that. Logan, for some reason, I'm trying to get to the next slide, but
you should be able to now.
Yes? Okay, great. Thanks. Okay. So I want to sort of back up a little bit and provide a little context. And I think one of, my job at FEMA, one of the most important roles I have is really to make the case for resiliency. And, every year we see the devastating impacts that disasters have on our local communities. And these pictures may be very familiar to you. This is Ellicott City, Maryland. And I'm actually originally from the East Coast, and my aunt and uncle just live 5 minutes away from this. And Ellicott City, Maryland has the distinction of experiencing 2 historic floods within the past 2 years, this past May and last July in 2016. And in Howard County, Maryland, where Ellicott City is located, the communities, they did a lot of planning after the 2016 flood. They held meetings, they produced reports, they developed these great mitigation project ideas. But the planning alone isn't enough, and the big thing, with the increasing costs and frequencies of these major hazard events, we really, have to really move towards a more nuanced understanding of what causes disaster. And, Ellicott City's flooding, that was caused by a combination. You have torrential rainfall, a vulnerable location, development that didn't account for a changing flood risk, and other policy decisions. And it's those policy decisions, with local government, that's sort of the key to resiliency. And, my big takeaway, and at every level, but especially, it's the local decision makers that need to be convinced that mitigation works. And so I'm going to be talking about these 3 different reports. And again, I want to say, a big thing also is that, especially, here at FEMA, we understand that, local budgets are tight. There are many very important priorities that are competing for limited funds that are available. So making a long-term investment towards being resilient, especially to a future event that hasn't happened, or towards an event that has already happened, but we don't think it's going to happen for a long time again, or it won't happen in our lifetime. It's very non-tangible, and so it's a really difficult sell. And so what I'm going to talk about is these studies, and hopefully they'll sort of show that they do show the financial return of investment, and can make that case that it's worth the money to spend up front to be doing mitigation. And so the 3 reports that we're going to be talking about are the Natural Hazard Safe 2.0 report. It was just issued this past January. I'm also going to talk about Moody's work. We have attached their investor summary that was just published in 2017, and the work they're currently doing. And then I'm also a little bit closer to home. I'm going to talk about FEMA's Colorado losses avoided study that we did right after the 2013 floods. All right, so Mitigation Saves 2.0 report. This past January, the National Institute of Building Sciences and FEMA released a report on the benefit-cost ratio of mitigation investments. And the overall results were that for every dollar spent exceeding select provisions of the 2015 Model Building Codes, $4 is saved. And then for every dollar spent through mitigation grants that are funded through particular federal agencies, $6 is saved. And the study quantified a number of benefits from mitigation, including reductions in the loss of revenue and loss of economic activity after a disaster event. And these are the important considerations to politicians. And the study also showed that the past 23 years of federally funded natural hazard mitigation projects will ultimately prevent 600 deaths, 1 million non-fatal injuries, and 4,000 incidents of post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's really important as well, just showing the whole community aspect and kind of giving that picture too. And so all of these reports that I'm talking about are the 3 handouts that we also have on the webinar that you can download, and will provide more methodology and context. Another really important finding, and especially as a trained land use planner, what's really kind of stood out to me is that every stakeholder benefits, but especially even the developers and lenders benefit. And if you look at the net benefits in billions, yeah, developers and lenders are shorter there on the totem pole, but that's still $50 million when you look at it, in the grand scheme of things, how much money can be saved. And the benefits that extend beyond the property line to lenders who face a lower default risk and to the broader community through this more resilient economy, and then lower public costs for disaster response. And then even your developers who will, they bear a higher upfront cost, they enjoy a net benefit because they can often pass on added construction costs to later buyers, and then they'll enjoy the lower risk from natural hazards while still owning the building. And the results of this study were so persuasive that the Building Owners and Managers Association of the Greater Los Angeles area in California have expressed a desire for higher design requirements. As long as the requirements apply equally to their competition, they feel that the modestly higher costs would reflect the cost of doing business. And so, that, would be great to see just nationwide occurring. And so it's great having reports like this to refer to if that's something that you want to do in your community or your state. All right, so the next report that I am going to speak to is Moody's Investor Service Report. And so another important consideration that local government decision makers have is that their ability to borrow money to pay for their long-term improvements. And so Moody's, who most of you know is one of the biggest credit rating agencies in the U.S., is now looking at whether local governments are investing in their resiliency. And this is huge. This is really new. We haven't had this before. And they're specifically warning municipal governments to prepare for climate change or see their credit worthiness fall, and that will result in higher interest rates and so forth. And what their bond analysts are evaluating are local governments' exposure to climate change impacts when determining their bond ratings. So by assessing environmental, social, and government indicators, things like municipal investments in capital projects, which would demonstrate future resilience, and their risk reduction goals, which would demonstrate a focused investment strategy. These bond analysts can gauge the likelihood of their bond repayment in the face of changing climatic systems. So the local governments that face a higher risk of climate shocks, also known as disaster events, are specifically asked by analysts during the rating process about their preparedness for such shocks and their activities in respect of adapting to climate trends. And part of that may be looking to see whether they have a mitigation plan and what's included in that mitigation plan as part of their methodology. But specifically, Moody's has embedded their credit risks resulting from climate change into their methodology too. And this is an analysis of their economic strength and diversity, which signals the speed with which an economy may recover. This captures climate-driven credit risks, such as economic disruption, physical damage, health and public safety, and population displacement. So this is really kind of cool to see where this will go and what this will look like in our future landscape. And the next example report that I wanted to talk about is a little bit closer to home. Many of you are aware of the 2013 floods that happened in Colorado, and FEMA afterwards decided that they were going to, we did a losses avoided study. And in 2013, the Colorado Front Range communities experienced what the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration described as a 1,000-year rainfall event in some locations. And so this unprecedented rainfall resulted in catastrophic flooding. It impacted 132 jurisdictions, and the most substantial flood damage occurred in Boulder, Larimer, and Weld counties, which also have some of the highest rated national flood insurance program community rating system communities. So they were already doing a lot to mitigate. And so we conducted a losses avoided study to examine the impact of floodplain regulations and policies on flood losses in these 3 counties, and how higher regulatory standards can help reduce future flood damage and create more resilient communities. And the study compared 2 damage scenarios: losses before and losses after regulatory measures are implemented. And we strive to answer the following questions. 1, what would have happened if regulatory measures were not implemented? And can a dollar value be put on the savings? And the results definitely showed us that if you keep structures up and out of where the water flows, it works. Communities that required that structures be raised 2 feet above the base level elevation of the floodplain, they saw the greatest benefit. Enforcing floodplain development restrictions, it's not easy, but it really works. For all the communities studied, floodplain development restriction is the best practice that yields the largest social and environmental benefits. The communities along the Front Range that invested in mitigation over many years saved hundreds of millions of dollars in damages, and their economies bounced back faster. And it's these types of stories that we hope we can continue to share with people, but that's what kind of gets people on board when they see that what states, communities, counties, folks have done, and that financial return on the end. And so that's what, especially just capturing more of best practices that folks are doing. So this is the end of my presentation. Feel free to reach out, and thank you.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Anne Kuchenmeister. I'm a community planner, and I do a lot of work with public engagement and get to support both FEMA and a lot of their initiatives through Resilience Action Partners, and also am currently supporting DOLA in collaboration with FEMA on bringing land use solutions to communities. So I'm going to kind of take the pieces that Logan talked about with land use planning and hazards and understanding those. He gave a nice higher level framework, and the data components that Nicole spoke to, and wrap those into how you might implement those with an engagement strategy. So planning strategy, and really getting to know who your stakeholders are. So this first critical piece, who it is that you're trying to communicate with, is where I'm going to start. So your stakeholders are, and really understanding them at a deep level is going to be a huge component in how you're going to communicate these messages effectively to the different audiences. And so considering things like who they currently trust, and that could be organizationally, think of different nonprofits or services within your community that these stakeholders would go to as sources of information. What is valuable to them on a day-to-day basis? Is it family? Is it, you know, are they an economically viable person in your community on a day-to-day basis? Do they have enough food on the table? What are their key concerns? And how do they normally communicate? Are they picking up a newspaper? Are they on Facebook or Nextdoor? Is it at the post office? What's their preferred way of communicating? And then what level of influence do they have over the process, or care and concern do they have for the process is also critical for thinking about how much of your energy you're going to contribute to each stakeholder group. You don't have time to meet with everyone, so how are you going to kind of structure that so that you can meet with those people who have the greatest need and inform others who are okay with less information? And think about what skills your community members have as well. So, you know, what can they bring to the table to help contribute and shape this effort so that they have some buy-in and they're empowered through it? And then what experiences do they have, especially with hazards? You know, this can be a really emotional topic for people, and so making sure you honor those experiences, bring those to the table, and know that that experience is going to be played out through the process is pretty important. So thinking of that, I have some tasty donuts here, and that goes to the first point of thinking about who are your key stakeholders that you're trying to get to, where do they go, what do they like, what influences them. So these are, this is a platter of Voodoo Donuts, which if you're in the Denver area, you know people have gone crazy for Voodoo Donuts and they'll line up outside waiting for them. It's got kind of a cult following. In one particular project I was working on, we really wanted to engage with a younger population, you know, the millennial group and people who knew this brand, knew this name, and were intrigued by it. So we partnered with Voodoo Donuts, who donated these. It's inexpensive, and used these to bring people out to complete surveys and gather feedback and have kind of a festive event around the donuts. So we tried to connect with something that was intriguing to our target group. It was simple, it wasn't expensive, but it did a good job in bringing those people out who would wait in line for these, and they could come, they could contribute, and get something for free that we knew they wanted. Another example of considering your stakeholders is you might think about what kind of groups are already existing within your community, advocacy groups or otherwise, that might have an interest in this in your day-to-day. And for hazards, there's a lot of different ways you can frame that conversation around, you know, how that advocacy group connects to it. So this particular photo is an advocacy group for biking. And, you know, in this case, for biking routes, especially on regional trail systems, they're often disrupted by hazards or heavy rainflow. So for the recreational users, they want to know that they're going to have a path that's clear without debris that they can ride on. And so that can bring them to the table around flood control and drainage. And for a user who needs this as a way to get around, crossing a flooded path could mean the difference between getting to work on time. So there's just a lot of different ways to think about how your local advocacy groups might be influenced by the hazards that you're trying to mitigate. And then the last example here is of a group. So this is CREA Results is an advocacy group for the Latino community connected to community health. And it goes to the point of who do stakeholders already trust. So CREA is a well-known group within this community. It's a source of information, and they have a network that they can easily extend information to and ask people to come out. And they're much more likely to come out than if we ask them to come to town hall to talk to a council member that they've never met. So thinking about who those trusted partners are and meeting with those groups to explain to them why this is important for their networks, for their constituents, and working with them so that they can help you bring the people to the table who you might otherwise be missing. So it can be a really effective strategy and really help you get to populations that different jurisdictions might consider difficult to engage. So moving beyond your stakeholders, once you've really kind of mapped out thinking them through, thinking about your goals for engagement is really going to help structure why you are embarking on this outreach. Why are you putting time and energy into having conversations and bringing people into the loop? So clearly defining those goals both internally, so within your organization, entity, or jurisdiction's staff, and externally. So internally, this goes back to the point, I think, too, that Nicole was talking about engaging with your decision makers. At the end of the day, whatever jurisdiction you're in has a framework for how things get approved, passed, and you should think about when you're selecting from the different land use solutions that Logan was speaking to, how is that going to go through your regulatory process, or who is going to have the ultimate say on that? And those most likely internal stakeholders should be considered just like any other stakeholder and considered strategically in how you're going to bring them into the fold, what information they need, what's most important to them. And then you also might think about within your organization who is going to be a key supporter and who can you leverage for support to help move things forward. Externally, thinking about why the solution to mitigate hazards is so important for that community. So that goes back to both the data points Nicole gave and connecting that to people's daily lives, and also understanding what that community values and what their critical needs are. And then lastly, what are you asking from them? When you're going out to these stakeholders, what exactly do you need to learn from them? What do you need to get back? Do you just need their passive approval and so that they're informed? Or are they at some point going to have a vote or say in the outcome and you need a positive response? So what level of support do you need from them? So the next piece around this is kind of developing clear messaging. The data that Nicole gave us is really powerful, and I think especially probably for people on the phone who have thought about this and are familiar with these issues, seeing those numbers and realizing that communities' credit scores could go down, immediately to us that strikes us as a critical issue that we understand. But taking that data and letting a message that connects to daily lives then be supported by that data is going to bring people to the table and pull at the heartstrings first. So I would suggest rather than leading with data, to lead with some value or critical need of the community, a story, a message that connects directly to your stakeholders' daily lives, and then support and substantiate that message with data. So, and that can be used in a lot of different ways to speak to different stakeholder groups, like, how Nicole showed that the different stakeholder groups can all benefit from mitigation, going out to developers and showing them this, going out to residents and showing them this. That same data point can communicate to a lot of people, and all you really need to do is change the message so that the leading part connects directly to their need, which is different for a developer than a resident. So keep your tagline short, something that's repeatable, so both people within your organization start to easily recognize it, learn it, and repeat it, and those outside of your organization can grasp it quickly and share it. And then include a call to action. So not only is it, what are you trying to share with people, but once they've gotten that, then what? What are they supposed to do? Should they find more information on a website? Should they, sign a letter of support? Like, what exactly are you looking for them to do to contribute? So one example I've seen is conceptualizing the number of hours that people lose in the event of disaster. So this could be a strong message for people who would rather use this time spending time with their family or going on vacation, or you could quantify this in how many family dinners together would you have missed because of the time you spend on this. Those are really valuable things to people that they're not going to want to lose to spend time, filling out paperwork, repairing their home. We're really connecting to those day-to-day things that they know are so important and how this could impact that. So the last piece of the three here is really planning through your engagement strategy. So you want to take those goals and those stakeholders that you've learned about, and then strategically think about how those things fit together with different strategies. And this is similar to, Logan presented all the tools for land use solutions that you might have. I would integrate this consideration into how you're implementing one of those tools so that the two are flowing together. So when are you making decisions? Where is there an opportunity for stakeholders to provide some actual influence on those decisions as you're developing the tool and implementing it, so the two can work together. So one project that I had the opportunity to work on with FEMA was where we were looking at how to think about events that were very positive in bringing in the community around hazard mitigation. So we equated this to baking a pie, and first said, think about it like you're developing your recipe. So why are you baking this pie? Why are you engaging? And what recipe elements do you need? Who are the people that you're going to engage with? And then invite others to join in the process. So think about how you're going to communicate out that you're doing this, and get the word out to all the people that you identified you need to engage with. The next piece, baking the pie. So what components and tools will you use to build an event that brings awareness and brings people to the table? The second last, share the pie. So what's your exchange of information during the event? How are you going to share information, and how are you going to get information back? And the last piece, leveraging the event for greater action. So all of that great information that you collect back, you want to make sure that you keep the feedback cycle going and share that back with the participants and also people who didn't attend, so that momentum continues. You show lessons learned, and you also validate that you were listening. So we've identified who, we've identified our goals, and now within our plan, looking at some effective strategies. One thing I said at the beginning too is consider how much influence people might have and what the impact is on their decisions. So the International Association for Public Participation, or IAP2, lays this out from inform, being you're sharing information, this would be your lowest level of engagement, to empower, being something like a vote, where the community really has the power of the final outcome, and all these stages in between. So I'm going to speak through some strategies that are organized around this structure. So the first one, this is a great example of informing, is FEMA has a high watermark sign program and often has launch events for these. So this is an example from Larimer County, where they unveiled their signs. They invited decision makers out, experts out, the community out to come and hear about the signs, see their location, talk about information, and they did a really good job then, sharing out the findings from these and keeping that cycle going. So this is a great example of an informed strategy, and posting the high watermarks for flood events in the past event. If you're working with rural communities, utility mailers can be great. They're really inexpensive, and if you're a utility within that area, it's going to hit everybody. And so you're going to be able to capture your entire geography, and it's a known source that people go to for information. So plugging in an opportunity there is a great informed strategy. Consulting involves a little more exchange of information. So you're going out, you're providing information, but you're asking for some feedback back. This strategy works really well within communities that have low trust or are disenfranchised. It's great with multilingual communities. And it shifts the power a little bit from the experts to the community. So what PhotoVoice is that you can go out, have a prompt that you're asking people to respond to. And in this case, we're asking people to explain what they want to improve in their community and what they love about their community. And using frames, they were able to frame either some of these are social aspects of their community, others are physical aspects of their community. But it really changed that conversation around, from us as experts coming in and telling you about your space based on our data, to tell us about your community from your perspective, and now we can match that to our data and have a conversation about it. Storytelling is another great way to understand what's driving people's feedback and what's driving their reactions, and get them to open up a bit in that conversation. So it's also a really good way to show other neighbors, ways to how people have been impacted in the past to get away from the, well, this won't happen to me, I haven't experienced this. Stories like this can really help personalize issues. And so sharing those out can help you understand, why people are reacting the way they are, but also help community members reflect that this has happened to others. Another example of this is hopes and fears. People will often, don't have an opportunity to share these within a technical meeting or a meeting where you're talking about, a land use regulation. But with disasters and hazards, they're there. So thinking about how you can get people to do this in a way that they feel safe. This was in Lyons, Colorado, where we were asking, after the 2013 floods, to think about future and think about rebuilding and think about resilience, and asking people to share out, what are some of your visions for the future, your hopes for the future, and what are the fears that you might have? Because these things are going to come out, and they might not be easily recognizable, but they will show up in conversations. And so by giving people an opportunity to share these, and even sharing them out anonymously with the group, can really, build trust that you care about that community, and also allow people to get things off their chest so they can move forward with thinking about the future. Open houses and workshops can be great, in particular for, dealing with complex land use regulations and explaining to people. So the photo on the right is looking at aligning resilience values between residents and the city of Boulder. So the city of Boulder identified some of their resilience values to our community, and then the community members came in and paired up what they said were their key resilience values, and then we found synergy between the two through this workshop. So finding ways to make the exercise meaningful and draw those connections between, again, people that, you need to build trust, or you need to make the data more personable, or you need to show those connections, can be really valuable. So then moving up the scale to collaborate, technical advisory committees can be great ways to bring in the many technical experts that a community might have. Oftentimes your technical experts in a community are going to be some of the most critical of the work, because even though they're not involved in the process on a day-to-day basis, they understand more how to pick it apart, and they may not have all the information readily available to them. They may have gaps in information, but bringing them into the conversation and making sure that they can get all the data they need to be informed and then actually understand and inform the process can turn people who might be very skeptical of how you're engaging in their community around a topic that they have expertise in into a partner in the actions that you're trying to take. And this last one brings us up to the top of that chart, to empower. So who has the final say? Who's going to make the vote? This is usually not a strategy that you are choosing. It's more one that you know is going to be part of the process because of how that jurisdiction operates. So this could be that the decision makers, your electives, are going to vote on a regulation and whether or not it passes. In some communities, this could be a referenda where it goes out to a community vote. But planning for this, just like you would any other strategy, and how you're going to build towards this and navigate it, is pretty critical for success. So think about that as another thing that you're gonna think about from the beginning and integrate. So I have 3 quick case studies. One of them, the first one, Ponderosa Mobile Home Park, gets to, I think, some of the ideas that, hey, we're dealing with really complex issues. The land use solutions that respond to these hazards are often very technical ideas. They're difficult to understand for people. So this first one, this is a multilingual community, and I put difficult in italics because I don't think of them as difficult, but I think that we say communities are difficult to engage when we're not sure how to effectively communicate with them or bring them into the fold because they're outside of our normal interactions. And so we've really got to think about what do they need in order to be in the conversation. They also have a pretty low trust for government. So they're right on the 4 Mile Creek in Boulder. the land use solutions in this community are currently, they're going through an annexation process. They're also going through rezoning, and there will be some home elevation. They are receiving disaster recovery funds from the 2013 flooding, and the levels of engagement here have been pretty broad. So everything from inform up to collaborate, where we're bringing them in. And this photo is of 4 of the resident leaders. So what we did in this community was to have the residents vote for who they would want to be key connectors to the project team and act as resident leaders. So we have 2 monolingual English speakers, 1 monolingual Spanish speaker, and 1 preferred Spanish and English as a second language speaker here. And they are leading a group of technical experts on a tour of their community, where they're explaining, you know, what their different priorities are, what flooding's like in their community, and the many different elements. So they've been empowered enough to stand up in front of a group of experts, and they're advocating for themselves. They understand the process to a level where they can speak to the needs and field questions. So I think that this shows that using a myriad of strategies, you can really bring people into the fold from very diverse backgrounds to try and find some solutions. In Denver, the Upper Montclair stormwater system work was done by OV in the city and county of Denver with urban drainage. And I've heard really great feedback from this planning process. Again, in this one, I think they started with listening to community concerns, and number 1 there. They went out to communities and had community conversations in some key target areas and let the community kind of start that conversation. So again, they were leading with the story, leading with what's important to the community, and then they came back with data. So they came back and they aligned those community goals and priorities with data, concepts, and options that would help alleviate some of the stormwater drainage flooding that they're experiencing. And so it was that connection of data back to what the community values, and then giving them options with trade-offs that they could look at that I think the community really valued. It helped them feel like they had, you know, some power in the decision-making process and that they were being understood and listened to. And then the last one, this one, FEMA, I'm working on in collaboration with FEMA here in Region 8, and it's a really cool kind of inform and visualization project. So this will be unveiling next fall, but it gets to sharing data, it gets to talking about the story that might be unseen, and it gets to explaining how those land use solutions and that framework really are impacting people's daily lives. So these totems will be physical things that will go up around Confluence Park. You might recognize that as the redone REI building downtown. And they'll show people how all those mitigation efforts have positively impacted that community and what it would look like in the event of flood if there had been no mitigation efforts. So the other one, we'll have a slider between the past, what it used to look like, and the investments that have been made that not only have flood benefits, but also recreational and community benefits. So it's a great way to just highlight the, you know, oftentimes mitigation efforts are invisible. You don't readily see the impact. A new park, the community sees that, that's great, they're excited, repaving, great, but sometimes mitigation efforts are really hidden. So this is really trying to draw attention to some of those different efforts. So I thought that was a cool one. So be on the lookout for that. They're not in place yet, but they should be going up, looking into next spring into the summer. So that's it for me. Thank you guys for the time to talk about engagement.
Great, here's our contact information. So we have just about 10 minutes. If folks have questions, please type them in, and we can start answering them and use the time that we have with the experts that we have here on the phone to answer some of your questions. So I'll let you go ahead and type in any questions you might have, and feel free to send them our way, and we'll go from there. So maybe just go ahead and type them in, and you can wait a few minutes. Okay, I'm not seeing any that are actually coming up right now. Again, if you do have some questions, please type them in. We can just keep an eye out here. Maybe I can just pose a question to either Anne or Nicole, but how would you think about using those particular resources that Nicole mentioned during different types of land use planning strategies that are going through the process of implementation? Essentially, which tools might they fit best with?
Sure, I can tackle that one first, Logan. I mean, what's nice is, I mean, some of the meetings that I'm at, and it depends whether, you know, and I think for the public, the Mitigation Saves 2.0, where you really, the brochure that's as an attachment, I mean, folks don't need to read the whole report, but, you know, for methodology, it's great. But that brochure is really kind of nice because it really simply, easily shows the benefit cost ratio of doing mitigation action. So if you're any public meeting, it's kind of nice to just have them out there. And I've done that for a few. I mean, I do more kind of trainings on how to write local mitigation plans and a little bit the justification why you would even do mitigation to begin with. And then, of course, just as Anne was saying, I mean, you try and incorporate the storytelling. So if there's a way, you know, if you have some best practices or some case studies that you can refer to while you're doing it as well. So, and then that's where then the losses study from the Colorado 2013 floods comes into play too.
I think too, a good story about the losses avoided or, you know, investing in mitigation and the returns on dollars is, as a tax-paying individual, I want to know how my taxpayer dollars are being used and that they're being used for things that, you know, are effective and have a good trade-off. And seeing that if I, you know, as a taxpayer invest $1, we're going to see a return of 5. And then what does that mean for the benefits in my community moving forward? You know, what does that open up as opportunities for how else we can invest? But the money that goes through government and decision making, like as a taxpayer, I just want to know that it's being used effectively. So I could see that being a really good story around those return on investment numbers.
Great. So we got a couple questions that just came in. Great, we got 4. We have the first one from Brian Hill, and it says, can you give examples of an effective short tagline for a hazard mitigation campaign?
So this is sort of random. This just sort of came, I mean, this has been used a bit. I mean, it's not the mitigation matters. I mean, that's just one of many of potentials, but I don't know. Anne, you might be better at this than me.
So I guess I would start with what are the goals of the mitigation. You might need to know a little bit more information for that one, but like, you know, thinking about, like, let's say, for example, something like wildfire and you're doing, you know, regulations within the WUI or something like this, you might come up with something like, you know, something involving home protection. I don't know. It takes me a second to wordsmith it, but something quick that gets to the point of protecting homes or that critical resource. I think you need to know what exactly is the goal of the mitigation effort you're pursuing, and then think about what the critical daily need is of the community to really get to a solid tagline. But
good question. So the next one we have from Lady Kasma is, what has been the best strategy you have used in reconciling the interest of those who believe and those who don't believe in climate change?
You know, sometimes for climate change, we've just, and this is Anne again, we've spoken about the underlying issues that we're addressing more importantly than the actual topic of climate change. Whether or not you believe in climate change, if you know that, you know, drought is going to continuously impact crops in a rural community, protecting crops is the livelihood of many of those rural communities. And so crop protection can be the critical issue that you start talking about. And, most people tell you their experience in reality with the fact that that's becoming harder and harder. And so sometimes I think delicately dealing with that topic and speaking to the underlying issues or impacts can be a really effective way to eventually get to the heart of the issue.
And this is Nicole. Especially on my end, representing the federal government, it's one of those things where it's a terminology. Everybody is quite aware that weather patterns, however you want to say it, call it cause, source, it's changing, and so we need to be taking action. And I think as Anna also sort of said, as you have the conversation, not trying to get away from that context, because I think that's where we sort of polarize and we just don't do any action whatsoever. So just trying to make it as neutral a context as possible.
Great. I'm going to keep us moving here because we got to wrap things up a little bit. We have a couple more questions. So the next one is, how can we incorporate hazard mitigation practices and saving on non-mitigation projects?
So it's like maybe showing the benefit of mitigation practices in non-mitigation projects?
Yeah, exactly.
I think, when you're talking, oh, go ahead, Nicole.
Oh, no, I think we sort of need to sort of specify what kind of project, non-mitigation you're thinking about doing, and then with anything, especially if it's a grant, is there some sort of benefit cost that we can associate with what you're thinking about doing would be my response to that. So just you'd have to get a little bit more specific, but go for it, Ann.
Yeah, I think you could start weaving the mitigation aspect into all projects. So, if you're building housing and you know that it's in a safe area for your hazards, you can highlight the community's building and approving housing in safe areas. This is going to give people comfort. It's a positive note. It doesn't always have to be that you're highlighting mitigation on projects that are, dabbling and crossing the line, or they have to elevate because they're in an area. But maybe showing, hey, we have these regulations in place and our community is safe. Look at all these projects that we've approved this year, and we know that all of them are going to keep our residents safe because they're in this area. So you can still call out the benefits of safety for projects that are not directly focused on hazard mitigation, just because they might be meeting all of your hazard mitigation requirements without question, and even if it's not a focus of that project.
Great. And then last question for rapid fire, because we got to wrap things up, is how can hazard mitigation impact economic development?
And it's huge.
Absolutely. You stole the words out of my mouth, Ann. It is huge. Because where you decide, to build regarding your hazard, and you have businesses, when we look at the lag time for your economic recovery after a natural hazard, it's huge. Yeah.
I remember a community, 2013 floods, they had substantial losses in housing, and they had businesses shut down because they lost a lot of affordable housing and they didn't have staff. The businesses themselves weren't impacted by the actual flooding, but it was this down the line issue of no longer having people within the community. So that bounce back took a long time because of that displacement. For businesses that weren't even directly impacted by floodwaters.
Right. All right, so we're right about time, and I think we got all the questions answered. So if you have any additional questions, here's our information. I left our contact information up. Thank you all for tuning in for this Planning for Hazards webinar on communicating community risk and resilience, and thank you both to Ann Kuchenmeister and Nicole Imone from FEMA and Michael Baker for sharing your expertise and experience. Can't thank you enough. So look for a follow-up email from me with all the information and resources that we talked about today, as well as the recorded webinar, and I'll be in touch soon. Thank you all.